Assalamu alaikum class. This lecture is about the medial and the inferior surface of the cerebrum. You guys did the superior and the lateral surface of the cerebrum, where you probably did the main sulci and gyri. So I am hoping that you have all the concepts about the sulci and the gyri. Just for the revision purpose, I should tell you the gyri are basically the tube that you see in the cerebrum, and the sulci are basically the grooves that demarcate between the two gyri. So majority of the main sulci and gyri, which are really important for the exam, are majorly present on the superolateral surface of the cerebrum, which has majority of the areas, functional localization areas that are responsible to control the motor activity, as well as responsible to receive the somatosensory sensations coming from the entire body, depending on the areas. So this lecture is about the medial and the inferior surface of the cerebrum, which has very fewer gyri uh, compared to the superolateral surface. And as far as their functionality is concerned, that should be covered when in a lecture later on when we do the different functional localization of brain. So let's start first with the medial surface of the brain or the cerebrum, where we identify the sulci first and then we'll identify the gyri. You just need to know their names and their positions and how they look like. So this is a diagram that you clearly see here. Uh, so the first thing that I want you to identify is basically the cingulate gyrus. But before I go there, I want to tell you that this layer, this line is basically known as the callosal sulcus. It's a groove between a gyrus here and the corpus callosum, which is responsible to connect both the cerebral hemisphere. And if I just go above here, if you see this sulcus, so this is basically known as the cingulate sulcus. So between the cingulate sulcus and the callosal sulcus, or I can also say that between cingulate sulcus and the corpus callosum itself, there is a gyrus that's called the cingulate gyrus on the medial surface, which is a huge gyrus that covers majority of the frontal lobe as well as the parietal lobe. Now, if I go back to the sulci, the main sulcus that I can see on the medial surface of the cerebrum, that would be the calcarine sulcus right here. Now, this calcarine sulcus basically starts from the this is the splenium of the corpus callosum, by the way. So just parallel to the splenium or just superior to the splenium, there's a suprasplenial gyrus here, right here. So just behind the supraspinaal gyrus, uh, we have another sulcus that starts from here and goes till the occipital pole, right here. So this is the calcarine sulcus. If I make the reference of the calcarine sulcus, all right, here the calcarine sulcus is going to give another sulcus right here, which is a sulcus between the occipital lobe itself and the parietal lobe. That's why we call it as parieto-occipital sulcus. Now, because of that, let's just go towards another thing, which is going to be the precuneus. Now, precuneus is another gyrus, which is a quadrangular space that is present just above or just behind the cingulate gyrus, and it's present in front of the parieto-occipital sulcus. So it's right here. And since we're coming from this end, obviously, why it's called precuneus, because it's right in front of cuneus. Cuneus is right here. So if we talk about cuneus, so cuneus is comparatively a triangular gyrus, which is present above the calcarine sulcus and behind the parieto-occipital sulcus. Then later, this is if you go towards the frontal lobe on the medial surface. So this is where it's written superior frontal gyrus, but in some books it's also written as the medial frontal gyrus because it's present on the medial surface. So this is the gyrus is present just above the cingulate gyrus towards the frontal lobe. Then later on, if I go just below the calcarine sulcus, and there is another gyrus here, which is known as the lingual gyrus, which is right here. So these are the main gyri and the sulci which are present on the medial surface of the brain. Then and then obviously there's a paracentral lobule right here, which is just anterior to the marginal sulcus right here, and it's on the medial surface, and it's basically running parallel to the central precentral and the postcentral sulcus on the lateral surface. So that's why we call it as a paracentral lobule. Now, if I talk about the inferior surface of the brain, so here you need to see two sulci here. One is basically with blue, you can see here. This is coming from the occipital lobe and getting into the temporal lobe. We call it as occipitotemporal sulcus. And then the one with the red line here is basically known as the collateral sulcus. Now, because of this, because of the occipitotemporal sulcus, we get two gyri in the temporal lobe on the inferior surface. One is going to be lateral to it. This is known as the lateral occipitotemporal gyrus. And one is going to be medial to it. That's called the medial occipitotemporal gyrus. Furthermore, if I go ahead, so just medial to the collateral sulcus, there would be another gyrus that's called the parahippocampal gyrus because it runs really parallel to the hippocampus. And then lastly, we have another globular structure. It's a gyrus here, which is right the medial most part on the inferior surface of the cerebrum. And this thing is known as the uncus. So these are the main gyri which you can easily identify on the medial as well as the inferior surface of the cerebrum. And one thing which I just told you earlier, the medial frontal gyrus, it's right here. This is the entire medial frontal gyrus, which in the previous diagrams was looking like just considered as the superior frontal gyrus. So it's better to call it as medial frontal gyrus because superior frontal gyrus you can actually see on the lateral surface of the frontal lobe. So yeah, this is all. These are the main gyri and the sulci that you can see on the medial as well as the inferior surface. I'm not going to focus on the functional aspect of these gyri because that's going to be covered in the later in another lecture where we will consider and we will try to tell you which gyri are basically holding which area has the functionality is concerned. सो जहाँ जहाँ पर जो जो एरिया जो जो फंक्शन करता है वो हम बिल्कुल अलग से एक लेक्चर में कवर करेंगे सो अभी राइट नाउ यू जस्ट नीड टू नो द नेम्स एंड द पोजिशंस of the different gyri which can be seen on the superior lateral surface of the brain as well as the medial as and the inferior surface of the brain. So if you have any questions, just do let me know. Thank you.